I am the founder of Time for PE, a social media marketing agency based in London, and we are live here for the 11th or 12th episode, I can't remember right now, of the podcast episode, Empower and Thrive, a holistic approach in business, actually a digital approach in business series. Today we have with us a guest expert. This is Sissel or Sissel. I don't want to make mistakes on pronunciation, but I'll leave the floor to you in a minute so you can correct me, obviously, that I'm wrong in this case. Founder of Foss and Bjorn, an author actually of A Quiet Leader. We're going to get back to that with you in a second. So Sissel has spent 20 years in a large corporate as a senior director level for internal audit. Very interesting. And during that time, she had an inspiration and got something really good to do. She wrote The Quiet Leader. The floor is yours, Sissel. Please give us the introduction, starting with your name. Thank you. And then, please do. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Jona. I appreciate the invitation. And yes, I am Sissel. That's how I've chosen to pronounce it, like Michelle or Adele. I'm from Norway originally, hence when I first moved here 20 years ago, I had to choose how to pronounce my name. And I opted for Sissel because that's the closest to the Norwegian pronunciation that we're going to get in the English language. And as you said, I've previously worked in financial services for most of my corporate career. These days, I run a sensory jewelry business for women and teenage girls with autism and ADHD. We produce sensory jewelry to help with fidgeting and stimming and managing sensory overload. And it's really nice, to be honest. As much as I loved internal audit and felt that I was doing something good by working in the third line of defense, as we call it, I really wanted to do something a bit more creative and more tangible and kind of doing good in a more concrete way. But while I was working in financial services, I saw so many examples, spoke to so many people, and also had personal experiences as an introvert that I thought, what's going on here? Why are all these capable, extremely intelligent and hardworking individuals not always given the recognition and credit that they deserve? And so I started exploring, I started researching, I started having interviews with people. And over time, because this was a very long process, an image built up. I learned about the brain science, about what makes an introvert, the skills and the strengths that an introvert brings to the table. And then in 2024, that got produced into a book called The Quiet Leader, which is now available everywhere you buy your book internationally, wherever you might find yourself in the world. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Sissel. Wonderful. I'm very interested in reading about the book, so I'll order my copy soon after the call, potentially. But yes, I will do that very, very soon. Thank you for the introduction. It's a very interesting topic. Not that I label myself as an introvert, but I think I'm in between an extrovert and an introvert. I think we have spoken together at the last networking event where we met. Actually, it's how we found ourselves. So who we are? Do we know who we are? Are we to be labeled? Do we want to be labeled as an introvert, extrovert, or someone in the middle? Actually, because there is a spectrum of that as well, I believe. But the point is not who I am, is about introverts in the audience. I want to understand, because I often see businesses, so I deal with different business owners. They are not necessarily extroverts, but they are not necessarily introverts either. But the struggle is to make them visible online. So so what is the advice you would give to someone that they think or they actually are introvert leaders or introvert in their business and in their personality? What can be the advice you can give to these business owners in order to manage the pressure they have across social media platforms or in the digital world?
Yeah, and it's a really interesting question, because in your intro there, you talked about, are you an introvert or an extrovert? Or are you somewhere in the middle? Does it change depending on the situation? And that's where I think there's 2 points to make before we get into the how can we make ourselves visible and more known. And that is, what is introversion? Because there's so many misunderstandings about this topic. And, people tend to say, oh, I don't like public speaking, therefore I'm an introvert. So there's a lot of conflation going on about what introversion really is. But actually, your ability or your comfort with public speaking has nothing to do with your introversion. But you are absolutely right that it is a spectrum. And so you will have some people who are different types of introverts. Some people are much more reflective and sitting back and prefer to think before they speak. And other people are more kind of social introverts, where they've got a small circle of friends who know them really well. But actually, when it comes to thinking and reflection, that's not the type of introvert that they are. So actually, a university in the US have done some studies to identify the different types of introverts that there are. And so that, I think, helps to kind of explain why some people think that they're an introvert in some situations and others are not. But actually, when it comes down to it, introversion is really just about two things. And that is how much you prefer to reflect before you speak, and how much you prefer to recharge your energy with other people or on your own. And so if you're an introvert in kind of purest sense, all the way right at the end of the spectrum, which of course no one is, but just for the sake of definition, then you prefer to think things through. You prefer to make sure that you know all the pros and cons before you act. And an extrovert, on the other hand, is much more about talking as a way to think through their position on something. So the difference there between an introvert and an extrovert in kind of the either end of the spectrum is how much you prefer to do that, how much you prefer to think things through, or how comfortable are you to talk and open your mouth before you know what the end of the sentence is going to be. And then the recharging point, I think, defines so many of us. An introvert can be out there, can be talking to people, chatting, doing public presentations. But then at the end of the day, they need to come back home and maybe sit with a good book or a good Netflix show on the sofa in order to kind of get their energy back up. Whereas the extrovert will get that energy and the recharge from the conversations they've been having. So I like to say, and it was one of the research books that I read to help me write the Quiet Leader book, defined it really nicely to say that an extrovert needs time in the interaction with people, and an introvert needs time between the interactions. So back-to-back meetings, if you're an introvert, not a good thing. If you own your own business, you're out there selling, and introverts are really good at selling, by the way, because they're really good at listening to what the customer needs. So it's not about shoving something down, a potential customer's throat. It's not about sell, sell, sell. It's about listen to make sure that your product is what the customer needs. And so it kind of sells itself. So there's loads of skills that an introvert has as a business owner that you might not automatically think. But if you find yourself, and your question was about if you're an introvert business owner and you're kind of feeling pressure to behave as an extrovert, then I would say there's a couple of things that I would give you comfort around, and that is really understand your introversion. What are your strengths? Because there's a whole suite of options, there's a menu of things and skills that are really beneficial to business owners that you as an introvert are more likely to have easy access to. So that's not to say that extroverts aren't good business owners. Of course, there's no direct correlation there. And of course, extroverts can also learn these skills, which is part of why Quiet Leader is written for both, because everyone's got the ability to learn new skills, of course. But there are certain skills that an introvert business owner is going to find it more easy to tap into than an extrovert. And that's things like reflection. What is my market? What are the problems that I'm solving? And to really go out there to test, to iterate, and to take that feedback. Because an introvert business owner isn't about this is the product, this is the best thing that's ever happened. It's about having that humility and the self-awareness to be able to take feedback. And as an introvert business owner, you're really good at that. So tap into that. I might not have everything figured out bit, but actually my product I really believe in, and go to the market with what you have and then take feedback and then reiterate. You're going to find it easier to do that. And so what I think it's important as an introvert business owner, if you're hesitating about the skills and about the value that you add, really learn about what the benefits of introversion are, because then you can start to see, well, actually, this is how I can apply this. These are my strengths. These are the things I find it easier to tap into, and then build on that. Because we shouldn't forget that how you see yourself is how other people will see you. So if you're apologetic about your introversion, and if you say things like, oh, I'm not able to take another meeting today, that sounds like it's something negative. But actually, your introversion means that you prefer to prepare ahead of each meeting. You prefer to know what you're going into. You'd like to understand the problem. You'd like to make sure that you're able to provide a sensible solution. You're not there just to talk for the sake of it. And so there's actually huge benefit for everyone to take a bit of space in between meetings, because that means that if there's papers that you should have read beforehand, you can come prepared. It means that you're not wasting the other person's time quite so much. And so if you flip your introvert preferences into thinking about them not as weaknesses, but as strengths, then it's a whole different ball game. The world's your oyster. You can really start to see the skills that the introvert brings to the table. So I'd say step number one, if you're feeling that pressure, is to flip it around, look at your strengths and the skills that you find it easier to access as an introvert, and then build on those.
Thank you, Sissel. I think you've touched my second question, actually, but that's very helpful and clear. For introverts in the room, if they're not introverts, they're extroverts or are in the spectrum, doesn't matter, but it's a very good, these are very good tips, actually. I want to understand, so you touched a little bit on the second question I mentioned, but I want to understand, we are all drained by the social media, and there's no denying. I don't think there is one person, whoever does it for business or does not as a business, we're all drained by it. So it's a constant evolving, constant trends, constant updates, constant algorithm, checking in things, whatever we hear across digital platforms. My question is, how can these introverts or how one, the audience as an introvert, these leaders in this case, how can they use social media to their advantage? So use this information and all this banter and all these things going on. How can they use that to their advantage without feeling so much drained? We are drained. There's no denying again, but feeling less drained. So how can they maximize?
I think it's an excellent point. There's something universal about, how much we're on social media that I think we should all take heed from, and maybe try to not be so addicted, but easier said than done. From an introversion perspective, though, actually social media plays right into an introvert's strengths, because introverts like to think more than the extrovert through what they want to say, what their points are. Actually, social media in writing, which is a space where introverts are generally more comfortable anyway, it really is the perfect avenue, because it means that you can write down your post ideas wherever you are. You can expand on them. You can maybe go back and edit a word if, as you're posting, you're not entirely happy about, your language or your phrasing. It also has a very direct feedback loop. So if someone is saying, I disagree with this, it's a very direct opportunity to say, well, actually, this is what I meant, or I disagree with you because. So it's that kind of interaction that perhaps counterintuitively is perfect for an introvert, partly because of the writing element of it and the reflective nature of it, but also because introverts, I think, are generally quite good one-on-one or in smaller groups. And so that conversation feels like it's in an intimate small group. So you get that comfort, even though you're potentially reaching thousands. I had a post the other week that, impressions on LinkedIn, it was, 102,000 impressions. And that's, if I was talking in front of 102,000 people, I'd be nervous, let's not pretend otherwise. But actually, because I was posting my opinion, I was sharing something I was passionate about and I believed in, it just felt like I was talking to one person, like a friend or an acquaintance, And so I think social media is an absolute gift for introverts.
That's a good way to see the things, right? So if you flip over the coin, probably you will see the bright side or the opportunity that there is within, so you can take advantage of that opportunity or options or whatever
Yeah.
they're out there. Okay, so this is a good example and a good practice to see the things, and I understand that. But let's say there are some introverts, not all of them, obviously, but there's a group of introverts. Let's say I'm just making an example here, who are not very much keen on sharing their stories, being overly visible on social media, or not just necessarily on social media, but in the digital world. It can be other ways rather than social media. So, what is the balance for these individuals who feel that they are being overly active or overly visible, or they cannot keep up with that sort of communication? So, how can they balance this need to build trust?
Yeah, I think the answer to that has to be the same for everyone, because to your point from earlier, social media is so pervasive, it's everywhere. You've got LinkedIn, you've got Instagram, TikTok, and I'm in my 40s now, so who knows what else there is for the teenagers and the people in their 20s that I haven't even caught on to yet. And all of these are draining for everyone. That's not necessarily a reflection of introversion or otherwise, but I think all of us need to identify what media are we happy to, what culture are we more comfortable in. LinkedIn is a very different culture than Instagram, and so you need to figure out what works for you as a person, because every single one of us as a leader, people will see right through you if you're not being yourself, if you're not being authentic, if you're not speaking with your own voice, and if you're not sharing things that you believe in, if you're copy pasting from others, or all of that's people are gonna see right through that. So you need to not try to be someone that you're not. And that's why I think that so much of the advice for introverts is really unhelpful. During my corporate career, at the very beginning in particular, until I learned that, I'm me and that's okay. I used to get loads of feedback about speaking early in meetings so that you'd get your voice heard. And I had a manager once who said that that would make it easier to talk for the rest of the meeting. But that, I think, is just another misconception about what introversion is, because it's not that we're not happy to talk or to share our views. It's just that we don't want to do it just for the sake of it. We want to do it at the right point. And so, say, for instance, if you're on social media, you can pick and choose where you want to interact, and that will be less draining, regardless of whether you're an introvert or an extrovert. I think we should all be selective about where we participate. If your customers are not on Instagram, don't waste time being on Instagram. That makes no sense. So pick and choose where your customers are, where your current and future customers are going to be, and also pick and choose what makes the most sense for you in terms of frequency, in terms of volume. I know people on LinkedIn who, rather than post themselves, find it a lot easier to comment on other people's posts, and they get followers and visibility, and are seen as thought leaders in their field because of that, because it's being spread far and wide. So there's loads of different ways of interacting in social media, and I think that really plays into an introvert, that there's options available. So you don't have to post every day. You don't have to kind of feel that you're on this hamster wheel. Of course, the more you interact, the more your message is going to get out there, but it shouldn't be at the cost of your well-being. So you have to find that balance about really understanding what works for you. And I think that self-awareness is where that starts. What are you comfortable with? Does it make more sense for you as an introvert to comment on other people's posts? Or do you prefer to make a comment and post something yourself? And, how often is it a morning thing for you because you wake up with ideas, or is that something that you want to do at the end of the day? So get to know yourself and what your preferences are, and then go with that. And then every so often, I think it's good for everyone, introverts included, to push ourselves a bit, try different things. But I'd say figure out that flow that works for you and what works for your customers. And that's where the real power is, I think, because that authenticity will then be really obvious to everyone.
Not everything works for everyone, so we have to be
Exactly.
strategically even there. So choosing our
Yes.
own
Yes.
possibilities, our
Which you
own
know everything
abilities.
about. Which you know.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much, Sissel, for that. Well, we are at the last minutes of the quite last 10 minutes of the call. I'd like for you, if it's possible, to share one big tip or one major tip that can help introverts to get the the message out there and without being drained again.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Selecting one thing is really, really difficult. But I believe that because there's so much, I don't mean to sound all doom and gloom. I think you've gathered that I'm very much about, seeing the glass as half full and not half empty. But I think we shouldn't shy away from the fact that as humans, we have things that are ingrained in us from a very long time ago. We are going to some defaults, we go to stereotypes, and people make quick judgments about other people. And that includes making judgments about introverts. And we're not going to be able to change that. People, if you're in a meeting with other people, as an introvert, you might think that people see you as being quiet, as they're not participating, maybe they're shy, maybe they don't know what the topic is, maybe they're confused. We can start to take on board all of these like potential things that people might think about others, especially because introversion is something that we've all kind of heard, but there's lots of confusion about it. But I think the one tip that I would give an introvert is to not listen to those potentials, because we know that there are biases out there. We know that people are going to make snap judgments. We have this thing, for instance, as humans, there's a bias called dominance bias, where we have a tendency to think that if someone speaks with conviction and certainty, that they must know what they're talking about. But actually, that's not the case. Just because someone says something and sounds sure about it doesn't mean that they're correct. It's just really unfortunate that in meetings, when you know later on after the meeting that the decision was not right, or that the person who spoke was wrong, there's no feedback loop, which is another reason why social media is so good, because introverts have that kind of constant feedback loop. But we're not going to be able to change that. It's going to take ages and ages and ages before we change that kind of heuristics, as it's called, the kind of the simple way of thinking. So the only thing we can change as introverts is ourselves. We can only be ourselves and be authentic and be comfortable with ourselves if we believe that we have something to bring to the table. So my tip would be, ignore what you think other people are thinking. And as always, we should take on board feedback if we think it's reasonable, etc., etc. But we shouldn't be taking on board feedback based on our introversion just because an extrovert tells us something. And so I would say, get yourself comfortable with what you bring to the table, and don't listen to the naysayers who say that you should be something else, because we have a whole list of great business leaders who are reporting themselves as introverts, who are leading massive companies and being hugely successful. And there's no reason why you, as an introvert and quiet leader, shouldn't also be able to do the same.
Very sound advice. Thank you so much, Sissel, for sharing that. I'd like to know, we don't have any comments so far from the audience, but I'm sure people will watch it on replay. Maybe the comments will come through, and then I advise that whatever they have as a question, please DM Sissel, not me in this case, although I can help you transferring or sending over, forwarding the request, but I'm not able, I don't think I'm an expert on the topic, so I will not be able to answer to your questions. But yes, Sissel, please tell us if you're running a workshop, a webinar, or where to find your book. Obviously, you can put the link in the comments. You're more than welcome. Put anything that is relevant for the audience when they can get support from you, please.
Oh, lovely. Thank you for that opportunity. I will post the link to where you can buy the book in the chat after. There's also a more in-depth webinar on Thursday this week, so I can send the link to that as well if you want to know more. And we're also running, so my book is published internationally by a firm called Pearson Education, and we are running with them an offer at the moment for the Kindle version of the book for the next 2 weeks. It's on for 99p, so you can save loads because it's normally at £14, I think it is. So the Kindle version is on Amazon at the moment for 99p for the next 2 weeks.
Wonderful. One last question, because I think we have a few more minutes, because the conversation is so interesting, and I want to understand a bit more. Also, please, which chapter of the book would you highly, extremely highly recommend?
It's interesting.
Not that I'm scrolling over and not reading the whole thing, so I can focus better, right? Focus my energy.
Well, that's very wise, and it is a book that's designed for you to be able to dip in and out of. So let me share a little bit about what the structure of the book is, so you can identify for yourself where it might be more useful for you. So part one is about what makes an introvert, the brain science behind what makes an introvert personality different. And there's loads of really useful research out there that explains the basis for the arguments in the book, where I say if an introvert has an easier time of accessing a particular skill, that's based on all of the research and the brain scans that I set out in part one of the book. And part one is also because I feel like this is a bigger topic about diversity and inclusion in organizations. If we bring the right leaders to the table, then organizations and organizational cultures are going to be stronger. So it's really important nowadays to make sure that we have leaders who are able to bring everyone along, who are able to build the corporate cultures that we need. So this is a bigger conversation in the larger DEI discussion. And all of that, kind of the theory of it, is covered in part one. And then in part two, you get a little quiz where you can test yourself to figure out what parts of the introvert skill set you are more in containment of what that you already have. So for you, Jona, I'd probably start with the quiz at the beginning of part two, so you can see where your strengths are, because you said you were kind of in the middle of the spectrum. So I think that's a really interesting use case to test. And then you can dip in and out of different chapters in part two, where we cover in more detail the different introvert strengths. So where in part two you want to focus depends entirely on the personal results of your little unscientific mini quiz at the beginning of part two of the book.
Sounds amazing. Thank you so much. Well, I enjoyed it very much. Very lovely conversation. Finding out more about me, it will be quite interesting. But yes, thank you so much, Sissel, for being our guest speaker today. Thank you, everyone who has tuned in or who is going to watch the replay. Again, please connect with Sissel if you want to hear more about how the introverts can maximize and boost their business and improve their well-being through their skills, basically. Yes. Thank you again, and I'll see you soon.
Lovely. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.